Hi everybody, I'm Rob Reed and this is the Penguicon 2021, the New Gun Owner's Guide. I thought this would be useful because I know that gun sales have been at an all-time high this year due to various events, and a lot of those sales are first-time gun buyers. So I thought I'd try to answer some questions that people might have if they have recently purchased a firearm for the first time or if they are considering purchasing a firearm for the first time. Let me give you a little bit on my background. I am a longtime shooter, collector. I write for firearms magazines. I'm also a NRA training counselor, which is the type of instructor who makes new instructors. This is very much like being a master vampire who can create lesser vampires. That's how I like to think of it. As an instructor, which I've been doing for 15 years, maybe a little longer, I mainly focus on new shooters. The two classes I mainly teach are basic pistol, which is you've never touched a gun before, so we're going to teach you how to do so safely without hurting yourself or anyone else, and give you solid grasp of the fundamentals. And then I teach the personal protection in the home class, which is the class that in Michigan recognizes or meets our state requirements to apply for a Michigan concealed pistol license. And to be honest, that's far and away the class people generally want to take, because most people do not seek out training. They only take the training that is mandated. And my CPL training classes far outnumber both the basic pistol classes and the more advanced classes I offer. Okay, let's talk about the legal aspects first. And I want to be clear, I am not an attorney. I am not a law enforcement officer. I am not giving actual legal advice here. But what I'm going to give you is a general working man's overview. You will want to research these issues yourself more. It's very easy to think something is legal and then find out later it's illegal and have that come back to bite you. So the first thing you should know if you're considering purchasing a firearm is making sure that you can legally own a firearm. There are disqualifiers, and you have to understand that gun laws in the U.S. Are two-tiered at minimum. First is federal. Federal gun laws always apply. No matter what state or jurisdiction you're in, federal gun laws always apply. Additionally, many states have additional restrictions above that, and in some states, certain cities have additional restrictions above that. So you have to know the law for the overall U.S., the state you're in, and sometimes the city you're in within that state. And be aware, when you travel, you are covered by the laws of the state you are currently in, not your home state. For instance, if you have a concealed carry permit from your home state and you travel to a state that does not recognize or honor that permit, you're committing a crime. So you have to research these things ahead of time. Okay, so let's talk about ownership first. To legally own a firearm in the U.S., you have to be a U.S. citizen or a resident alien. That means you have a green card. You would know if you're a resident alien. You would know if you're a resident alien or if you're here on a student visa or a tourist visa or whatever. There is some exceptions if you're here for an organized shooting event that the ATF recognizes. You might be able to handle a firearm. Also, if you're here for hunting, you can handle a firearm, even if you are not a citizen or U.S. Resident alien. What you do in that case is you get a hunting license. Doesn't mean you actually have to hunt, but you could get a hunting license and then go to a range and rent a gun as a non-resident alien, non-U.S. citizen. And yes, non-U.S. citizens have been charged or kicked out of the country for violating these laws. You must be to purchase a firearm, assuming you are a U.S. citizen, you must be 18 years old to purchase, or older, to purchase a rifle or a shotgun from a licensed federally firearms licensee dealer, i.e. a gun store, a gun dealer. You must be 21 to purchase a handgun from a licensed, FFL, Federal Firearms License holder, i.e. a gun store. Between the ages of 18 and 21, so 18, 19, or 20, you may own a handgun under federal law, but you may not have purchased it from a gun dealer. So you had to either have been given it by someone as a gift, an outright gift, not a straw purchase, which we'll talk about later, or in the states that allow it, which is most states, you could have done a private party purchase from a private individual who is not a gun dealer at the ages of 19 or 20 to purchase a handgun. Now, I'm going to talk about federal law in general. State laws vary from state to state, so I'm not going to specifically talk about Michigan law or California law or whatever. I'll just say some states have, say one thing, other states say another. Whatever state you're in, you should check. Most states do allow private party purchases of firearms. That means in most states you can legally buy you can buy a firearm from another private citizen without having to have the transaction go through a gun dealer. Some states, however, prohibit this. Some states require every transaction to go through a gun dealer, so if you wanted to buy a gun from a friend, your friend would have to go to the gun dealer, give the gun to him, he'd do the paperwork, then you'd go to the dealer, you'd do the paperwork with the dealer, and you'd buy the gun from the dealer. Even if you paid your friend for it, you have to pick it up from the dealer. Some states have restrictions. You might need a license before you can purchase, say, a handgun. Michigan, which Penguicon is held in, actually requires what's called a permit to purchase before you can buy a handgun. You get it from your local police station. Some states do the same thing for rifles, or shotguns. So it does vary from state. Now, any firearm you purchase from a licensed FFL, and once again, federal firearms licensee, i.e. gun dealer, there will be a background check. Okay, they will run a NICS, National Instant Check System, where they run your name through an FBI database. It's a simple phone call, usually takes 5 minutes or less. They will also have you fill out a ATF form 4473, which is a form you fill out that includes your name, your address, your social security number. You have to answer a bunch of questions, yes or no. The questions are all to determine your eligibility. If you answer like, are you a convicted felon? And you answer yes, that means you can't purchase a firearm. When I say that all sales from a dealer require that you do this NICS check and 4473, that includes if you buy a gun from a dealer at a gun show. Just because they're at a gun show doesn't mean that they can ignore this paperwork. The difference is if you happen to find a private individual who's not a dealer who's selling, they don't have to do this paperwork. They have no way to do this paperwork. And once again, if your state allows private purchase of firearms from a private individual, you can do that. Whether or not it's at a gun show or at your own home, or in a parking lot, it doesn't matter. As long as your state lets it be legal, it's legal to do. But there's no exception. If you buy from a dealer, whether it's in their shop or at their booth at a gun show, you will do the paperwork. You will have a background check done. Federal law currently allows you to manufacture firearms for your own use. Under current federal law, and this may change, you do not have to put a serial number on those firearms. This is where 3D printing your own guns comes in. Be aware that if you do manufacture firearms for your own use, you should not, and I believe it is actually prohibited federally, to sell them or even to give them to someone else. That would, be an unserialized firearm. You cannot sell it, and I believe you can't even give it away, although you can check with an attorney on that. And any gun you make still has to meet legal requirements. For instance, if it's a rifle, it still has to have a minimum of a 16-inch barrel. You can't just make a rifle with an 11-inch barrel and say, well, I made it myself, therefore it's legal. Same thing for machine guns. You cannot make a machine gun for yourself and say, oh, it's, I know machine guns are illegal to buy. Generally, it's a long, convoluted thing. But I'm going to make my own. No, you can't do that. It also has to have a certain amount of metal in it so that it is detectable by an ordinary metal detector, airport security style. I forget how many ounces that is. It's actually specified. So most 3D printed designs, if they don't have enough metal in like the barrel and the slide, they will include a cavity where you stick a piece of metal in there to make sure you meet federal law. Something to be aware of if you plan on using a 3D printer to make firearms or using an 80% receiver. Okay, people who cannot legally own a firearm. anyone convicted of a felony, doesn't matter if it's a violent felony or a nonviolent felony, anyone convicted of misdemeanor domestic violence, even if it's just a misdemeanor, is a disqualifier. Someone who's a fugitive from justice, and you should ask your attorney if you think you might be a fugitive from justice. For instance, if you're out on bond for some reason, you may or may not be a fugitive from justice. You know, it doesn't necessarily mean that you escaped from prison or that you ran before your trial, but, you know, it's a technical term. You should look into it. Here's one that is going to be unpopular to hear. The ATF considers anyone who is an unlawful user or addicted to any controlled substance to not legally have the right to own the firearm. I mean, that's what the law says. The ATF considers having a medical marijuana card as evidence that you are an unlawful user of a prohibited substance and therefore are disqualified. Even though it may be legal in your state, it's still illegal federally, and the ATF does consider even possession of a medical marijuana card to be evidence that you are, you know, unlawful user or addicted to a controlled substance. Something to be aware of. That one has tripped people up. You also may not own a firearm if you have been dishonorably discharged from the military. That is because a military dishonorable discharge is considered the same as a felony conviction for this purpose. You also may not own a firearm legally if you are in the U.S. illegally. If you have revoked your U.S. citizenship, you have given up your right to own a firearm. And here's the kicker. If you revoked your U.S. citizenship, but then later, there's a word for it which I can't think of right now, but later disclaimed the revocation saying, no, I was wrong, I want to be a citizen again, and you go through the procedure to become a citizen again, which there is a procedure, the fact that you revoked it voluntarily in the first place, you gave up your firearm rights then, even if you become a citizen again. It's weird, but that's how the law works. The last item, and this is a big one, is anyone who's under a restraining order or a personal protection order. In most cases, you may not possess a firearm while that order is active. So this is one you're most likely for most people to be caught up in. I mean, it's not that you're likely to be caught up in it, but if you have any of these disqualifiers, that's one of the most common. Because you might have a restraining order filed against you if you are undergoing a divorce. I mean, it does happen. You might have a restraining order filed against you by a coworker or a neighbor if you're having a dispute over, say, boundary issues, property line issues, or something at the workplace. Doesn't necessarily mean that the restraining order and that the issue behind the restraining order is valid. I mean, you could be in the right and they could be in the wrong, but if they file a restraining order on you and the judge, you know, signs it, guess what? You can't have any guns for the duration of that restraining order. It may just be temporary until you get a hearing before the judge to get the order lifted. But if it's not lifted for the whole duration of that restraining order, no firearms. You got to find someplace else to store them. Okay, enough on the legal stuff. Like I said, not an attorney, so if anything came up that made you go, check with an attorney. And check with an attorney who knows about firearms laws. Don't ask the guy that is a tax attorney. Most important things to understand about firearms are safety and responsibility. Guys, you know, they're not toys. They are capable of causing serious bodily injury or death, even when just used for target shooting. I mean, if you screw up, you can kill somebody. Okay, we're not talking about defensive shooting here. We're not talking about anything but just going to the range and target shooting. If you screw up, you could kill yourself or somebody else. You got to take it seriously. So there are many firearm safety rules, and you'll get different variations on them depending on who you talk to and where they learned. And literally, I could spend this entire 45 minutes or so talking about just safety rules. There's that many. But let's hit the big ones. What I consider to be the big three. These are the NRA 3 rules for gun safety. And if you understand these and follow these, you're 90% of the way there. The first is always keep the firearm pointed in a safe direction. Okay, anything the muzzle's pointed at is where that bullet is going to go if it fires without you intending it to. Okay, so if it's pointed at your foot when you accidentally pull the trigger without intending to, guess what? You just shot yourself in the foot. So always keep the firearm pointed in a safe direction. That means not at anything you don't want to shoot. At the range, you keep it pointed at the backstop, at the berm. If you're in a range with those dividers, you know, where you're standing in a booth and there's a wall here and a wall here, you don't point it sideways at the booth, because guess what? There's somebody next to you in that booth, and when you point that gun sideways, you're pointing it at their head. And those walls are not bulletproof generally. When you are shooting and you get tired and you go to what's called low ready, where you're kind of pointing the gun down at the ground, don't let it point at your leg. People do that. Okay? So keep it pointed in a safe direction. Second one is always keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. We tell people to put it on the side of the frame. You don't put it on the trigger until your sights are on the target. Why? Because you can get startled and pull the trigger without meaning to. It's easy to do. Okay? You have the gun low ready, let's say, you bring it up to the target, you're aiming at the target. Once you're aimed at the target, you put your finger on the trigger and you shoot. As soon as your sights are off the target and you start to lower the gun, take your finger off the trigger. Okay, third one. Always keep the firearm unloaded until ready to use. There's no reason to have a loaded gun in your range bag when you go to the range. Okay, if it's a defensive pistol, you'd have it in a holster at your belt. You wouldn't have it in the range bag. At home, there's no reason to keep your deer rifle loaded. I mean, you're worried about a deer breaking into your house at 3 in the morning. If you have a defensive firearm, pistol, rifle, or shotgun, it is considered to be in use, so you can keep it loaded, but you need to keep it secured so that unauthorized people don't get to it. But don't keep it unloaded if it's not in use, okay? Safe storage. Always store firearms so they are not accessible to unauthorized people. And who's unauthorized? Well, anyone that you, the gun owner, did not specifically say can have access to that firearm. So if you're married and your spouse is responsible and you want your spouse to have access to that firearm, they can have access to it. They're not unauthorized. If you're in a relationship and your partner has a child and you don't want the child to be, to handle that firearm, that means they're not authorized to handle it without your direct supervision and control. You must secure it in such a way that they won't and can't. And that does not mean just putting it on top of the closet, on the top shelf of the closet. Kids find stuff. You know that, if you got kids or if you've been around kids or if you even remember being a kid. Lock it up in a safe, big safe, little safe, bedside safe, whatever. Lock it up. Safes. Leads me to safes. You can have a small safe next to the bed that's suitable for like a handgun if you want a home defense pistol. You can have a big safe in the bedroom or in the basement or in a spare bedroom that for like several rifles or shotguns or whatever. Have them locked up. Generally though, do not put a gun safe in the garage. And that's because it's very easy to break into a garage and very easy for them to break into the gun safe once they're in the garage and steal your guns. And in some cases, they'll just drag the whole safe out. They'll have that garage door open, they'll tie some chain to the safe, and they'll yank it right out. Trigger locks. Now, got to secure the gun. You can use other locks that lock the gun up. You can put it in a little bitty case that just holds the one gun. You can put a cable lock through it, but don't use a trigger lock, and I'll tell you why. And the NRA won't say this, but I will. A trigger lock has a post, and then another part that goes together and that goes through the trigger guard. Well, when you do that, that post can contact the trigger. And if you put a trigger lock on an unloaded gun, I misspoke. If you put a trigger lock on a loaded gun, which you are not supposed to do, and you should know that, and everyone that uses a trigger lock should generally know that. But if you happen to put a trigger lock on a loaded gun, the act of installing the trigger lock can pull that trigger. And guess what? The gun will not fire. Because of that danger, I generally do not recommend trigger locks, because it is possible to make the mistake of thinking the gun is unloaded when it is in fact loaded. And you put a trigger lock on it, and as you're fumbling with it, you may point it at your stomach, you may point it at somebody else, and when you try to snap that thing together and the post pulls the trigger, you just fired a shot at somebody. So that's why I don't recommend trigger locks. Okay, one more safety rule. Because this was still safety rules, safe storage is one of the safety rules, is be aware of your backstop and what's behind it. Bullets go through things. Okay, if your backstop is not sturdy enough, the bullet will go through it and keep going. Bullets travel a long distance. They bounce off things, they ricochet. So know what you're shooting at, know what's behind it, know that it's something that you can shoot. If it's not, then don't shoot. Okay, like I said, I could talk for 45 minutes on gun safety, but I won't. You get the general idea now. If you remember those big three, keep it pointed in a safe direction, keep your finger off the trigger until ready to shoot, keep it unloaded if it's not in use, and then store it so it's not accessible to unauthorized persons, and be aware of your backstop and what is beyond it. That's 90% of what you need to know. Advice for people buying their first firearm. If you've already purchased one, this is a little late, but you might still learn something. What gun to get depends on what you want the gun for. Okay, there are a lot of firearms out there, just like there's a lot of vehicles out there. If you want to go really fast on a racetrack, you'd buy a sports car. If you want to carry your construction equipment from job site to job site, you'd buy a heavy-duty pickup truck. If you want to carry your kids around, you'd buy an SUV or a minivan. Same thing with firearms. There's people say, why do you have more than one gun? Because not one gun can do it all. If you just want to target shoot, and you don't care about home defense, you don't care about hunting, you just like the zen aspect of shooting, and you don't want, say, specifically an air rifle, or something like that. 22 target pistol, 22 target rifle, nice, inexpensive to shoot. Ammo's, well, usually pretty cheap, except right now. Very suitable for the task at hand of target shooting, and very suitable for certain precision competitions. I mean, you can get really specialized 22 target pistols and 22 target rifles for specific competitions that are built for that job. If you want to do trap shooting, over-under trap shotgun, they can be a little pricey, not too horrible, but they're kind of dedicated tools for that purpose, for that sporting purpose. Some of them might also be suitable for, say, duck hunting. Some, you might not want to take your really nice over and under out into the swamp to hunt ducks, but depends on the gun. Home defense, well, that 22 target pistol and that trap over and under shotgun are really not optimized for that. Then you're looking at something in a more appropriate caliber, center fire, 9mm, 38 special, something like that. Maybe a shotgun, but not like a duck gun. We're talking like a 12-gauge pump shotgun or something along that line. Or even an AR rifle in 5.56 or 223. That can be appropriate too. Concealed carry. You're not going to carry that 22 target pistol. You'd want, once again, like a 9mm or a 38, maybe a 45. I mean, you'd want something designed for that. Smaller, a little lighter, easy to carry, still reliable, still fires an effective caliber, something that's still made and you can still get parts for. And once again, it's not that I'm saying you should get a gun for self-defense. I'm saying whatever the reason you get a gun for, understand the reason, and that should drive your decisions. If you want to deer hunt, that's a different rifle entirely than if you want to target shoot, generally. I mean, you can take your deer rifle to the target range, but it's really, not that much fun. Okay. Home defense and concealed carry. Let me talk about those briefly. I'm not going to make this all about home defense and concealed carry, but let me hit that specifically. If you're looking at a handgun, you can easily get a handgun that's suitable for both. In general, for concealed carry, size and weight are more important than for home defense. For home defense, the gun can be a little bit bigger, a little bit heavier, a little bit more awkward to carry or conceal because you aren't carrying it or concealing it. It's locked in a bedside safe unless you need it. The upside is that bigger, heavier, bulkier gun is easier to shoot well because the extra weight soaks up some of the recoil. And generally it will hold a little more ammunition because it's bigger. For concealed carry, you might want something a little smaller, a little more easy to conceal. Trade-off is it's going to hold fewer rounds. It's going to be generally just a little bit harder to shoot, not unmanageable, but not quite as pleasant as the full-size gun. Now, when I talk about concealed carry, I'm talking about legal concealed carry. I'm talking about either you live in a state that allows you to carry open or concealed without a permit, and you choose to do so, or you live in a state that requires you to get a permit to concealed carry, and you've chosen to get the permit. I'm not talking about illegal carry. If you have any interest at all in handguns for self-defense, and if you don't, that's fine, but if you do, I actually highly recommend you look at your state law, and if your state requires a permit to concealed carry, I recommend you do whatever training and paperwork is required to get that permit and get it. And there's a few reasons for this. The first is you never know when things might change. And you might have a situation come up in a year or two from now where you decide that, hey, I really kind of need to carry that pistol right now. I'm being stalked or whatever. Getting a carry permit could take months, and you might not have time to wait those months. So if you have it, you have it when you might need it, even if you don't necessarily plan on carrying it when you get it. The other reason is very often having a carry permit gives you extra legal protection when you're just transporting your handgun. For example, and like I said, I'm not going to get too state specific here, but let me use Michigan as an example because it's the state I'm most familiar with. In Michigan, if you do not have a concealed carry permit, you can carry your handgun unloaded in the trunk. If I take my handgun and say I don't have a carry permit and I stick it in the glove box and I'm not thinking about, oh, that's concealed carry, I'm like, oh, it's just in the glove box. Guess what? That's a felony, carrying a concealed weapon. Michigan allows open carry without a permit, meaning you can carry like the police do with an openly carried pistol on your hip that you don't have to conceal. The problem is the instant you step in a vehicle, legally, even if they can still see it through the window glass, legally that's considered concealed carry now. So if you don't have a permit, guess what? You're committing a felony the instant you get in your car. Something to be aware of. And like I said, that was just one example of one state. State laws vary. Okay, let's talk about what you need beside the gun. Secure storage. Have something in your house to secure your gun. And what exactly you have depends on your circumstances. If you live alone, your biggest concern is theft. So have something that will keep someone from just stealing your gun and using it in a crime. If you live with children, a bigger concern than theft, I think, is the child getting a hold of it and causing a tragedy. So you need, security to make sure that they won't get it. So not only do you want to secure it from theft, you also want to secure it from the kids. And in that case, then you start talking about not only having a safe, but storing the gun and the ammunition separately. So even if they happen to get one, they don't have the other. That's when I was growing up, that's what my dad didn't have a gun, but my grandparents did. They didn't have the ammo in the same room. I didn't know for years that they actually had some ammo for the .22 rifle and the 12-gauge shotgun they had that they'd showed me, and I'd seen, and I knew where it was. And this is back kind of before gun safes were a thing. I mean, we'd glass cabinets with, or wooded cabinets with glass, doors, which you don't see as much anymore. But the ammo was hidden. I didn't know for years that they had ammo for those guns. Your car. Your car is not a gun safe. Cars are broken into all the time. I've had my car broken into a few times over the course of my life. Never had a gun stolen because I don't leave guns in the car. Now, I'm not going to be a hypocrite and say I've never left a gun in the car, but if I do, it's like, oh, I got to go to the post office, I can't carry there. Well, actually, you can't even carry on postal property in most cases. In Michigan, you can't carry in a hospital. Oh, I got to, run to the hospital to do something really quick, lock the gun in the trunk. What I really need to do is get a little mini gun safe and bolt it to the trunk. I haven't done so yet because it comes up so rarely for me. But if you leave it in the car overnight or for longer than a few minutes, guess what? Your car's going to get broken into. You're going to get your gun stolen. It happens all the time. So don't leave your guns in the car. Okay, besides storage, let's talk about other things. You've just bought a gun. Doesn't matter what it is. I don't care if it's a deer rifle, .22 target pistol, home defense pistol, whatever. What else do you need to go with it besides a way to keep it secure? Well, you need to keep it in good operating condition. So you need something like gun cleaner. Hoppy's Elite, this is just one of many, doesn't matter what you get. Anything modern will do. Hoppy's number 9 is still the best powder solvent I know of, even though it smells horrible. Cleaning patches. Cotton, you don't want nylon. Various cleaning supplies, I got a whole ton of them, especially because I'm a gun writer, so they send me samples. But basically, you got your standard brush that goes in the bore to clean it. This one actually has a slot that you can put the cleaning patch on. You might not see it. And an old toothbrush. Just save this old toothbrush. I use it to scrub the inside of the receivers on the handguns or whatever. Sorry about that. My video camera automatically shuts off after a while. Okay, talking about what you need with a gun. Hearing protection, safety equipment. Just plain old foam earplugs. You can see this is a jar of them. You can buy them like, you know, by the 2-pack. But if you go to CVS or a drugstore in the hearing aisle, where they have earwax cleaner and stuff like that, you can get a jug of them a lot cheaper. And I wear them at night too, to sleep better, because I have sleep apnea, so I go through these because I lose them. But I also have, you know, a box like this in my range bag. And then when the ones that you get that are not individually wrapped, what I'll do is if I have friends at the range, I shake out a couple into their hands rather than have them dig their grubby paws in the box. That's earplugs. Muffs. Okay. Hearing. Hearing loss is permanent and cumulative. Every bit you lose, you're never getting back, and it adds up over time. Firearms cause hearing loss, flat out. Even if your ears are not ringing, you have probably suffered hearing loss. Okay? If your ears are ringing, you've definitely suffered hearing loss. You might not even notice it. I know a lot of older shooters who are darn near deaf, especially ones that were shooting before hearing protection became really common. What I do is I wear, especially if I'm indoors, earplugs, and then I put a pair of muffs on over them. Why? Because I wear the highest rated muffs I can find and the highest rated earplugs, and are like 32. By wearing both, I don't get double the protection. I get the highest ranking of the protection and then a little bit more for the second item. But I wear both to get the maximum protection I can get. And that way also, and this has happened to me in the course of my shooting career, if I happen to think we're done shooting for the day or for a moment or whatever, and I take off the muffs and someone shoots, I've got some protection in it. I'm not, you know, going to be deafened. I've got something in there. And that has happened. Indoors, you get the concussion from the sound waves bouncing off the walls. So it's especially bad, so I always wear both. And if you know somebody who's a new shooter, or if you are a new shooter and you have a problem with a bit of flinch, often it's the noise. It's not the actual recoil of the gun bothering you, it's that muzzle blast and noise. And if you wear double up, that actually helps. So be aware of that. That was things to have. Oh, one more. Safety glasses. Okay, you only get one set of eyes. There's lots of dangers to shooting to your eyes. You can get hot gases blown back in your face. You can have fragments ricochet off something and hit you. I've had that happen multiple times. You shoot at, even at ranges that are set up to be safe to shoot at steel. If you're at a competition, you're shooting at steel, sometimes you get weird stuff. And I've been hit close to the eyes, you know, over 25 years, several times. I have a pair of prescription glasses that are made. I didn't think to grab them for this, but they're prescription because I'm blind. And they have side shields, and they're made to safety glasses standards because I can't wear these little cheap ones over my regular glasses. But invest in safety glasses and earplugs. Excuse me. Other things you need. Besides your cleaning supplies, you need things like a stapler to staple the targets up. You know, the like home improvement staplers, not the desktop staplers. Masking tape is useful. Sometimes you run out of staples, or you know, you just want to tape the targets up. You can tape the bullet holes with the masking tape. There's all sorts of stuff. Eventually, you'll want to get a bag to put it all in. Doesn't have to be expensive or big, but having a range bag to put everything in is good. And if you don't have a gun case, you can put the gun in the range bag, and that's generally, in most places, is legal, especially if it's not loaded. Okay, also safety. Lead contamination, lead and heavy metal contamination. Most projectiles, bullets, are lead. not all, especially if you're shooting shotguns and you're using loads used for hunting. You can get steel shot, but you wouldn't really practice with that. There's also heavy metals in the primers. When you fire the gun, it's out there in front of your face that all those metals are vaporized, and it's all vaporized, and you breathe it in. So you want to avoid shooting in poorly ventilated indoor ranges. Most modern ranges are pretty well ventilated. They have positive air, well, okay, I might be using the phrasing wrong. It's either positive air pressure or negative air pressure, where the air is constantly being circulated and driven outside. But I have shot in older ranges that don't have as good circulation systems and filtration systems. There was one range I used to teach at, and I'd be on the range for 3 hours, which was the state requirement. And at the end of the day, I'd be coughing up black snot, and black snot would be coming out of my nose, and it was just awful. And I finally quit teaching there because I could taste the lead. It was like licking a lead mini. I just realized this can't be good for me. So to avoid lead contamination, try to avoid ranges with poor circulation. Do not handle the spent brass at these ranges. They will often say, please sweep up your brass, and they'll have a broom, and they'll kind of expect you to sweep it up into this dustpan and collect it. Don't do that. Literally, do not do that. The reason being that when you're sweeping the floor, all of that contamination that's on the floor, you're now putting it in the air for you to inhale. Let them deal with it after hours. If they're smart, and you'll see ranges do this, they'll be wearing Tyvek suits and respirators to keep the lead out of their employees' systems. If they're dumb, they won't, and I wouldn't go back. But if they yell at you for not sweeping up your brass, say, oh, I'm sorry, I won't come back, and then shoot someplace else, is what it comes down to. It is generally recommended that you not shoot if you're pregnant. I'm not a physician. This is not medical advice. This is the general consensus, reading a lot of articles about this, talking to people about it, and there's two reasons. One is the noise, and then probably the more important reason is, once again, the lead and heavy metal contaminants. But, talk to your physician, talk to your OB. Maybe the risk is overstated, or maybe you have a valid reason to not worry about it, but in general, it is generally not recommended to shoot when you're pregnant. Okay, let's talk about actual operation of a pistol, specifically pistols. And that is the most important thing, which is how to make sure you've unloaded the pistol. Because this, once again, goes into safety. Now, just so you know, I've got some dummy bullets here. These are aluminum cases with plastic tips. There's no powder or primer. And I triple checked everything. When you unload a pistol, the proper method is you remove the magazine first, which I'm going to put back in. The proper method is you remove the magazine first. They're still a round in the chamber, okay? So now you have to get that round out of the chamber. The best way to do it is to lock the chamber open when you pull it back. Now, you may not have saw this, because I don't know if the video caught it, but when I did that, one of those dummy bullets fell out and landed on the floor. Now that the chamber is locked back, I can actually, it's hard to show you and do it correctly, but I can actually look in here and know that magazine's out, and I'm looking in the chamber and making sure that when I pulled the slide back, the extractor didn't miss the rim of the cartridge and leave the cartridge in the chamber. Unlikely, but possible. And I'm looking in there and touching there to make sure it's empty. Now that I know it's empty, I can run that slide back forward. Well, I can't drop the hammer because there's a safety disconnector, and safely drop the hammer. Now, this is what happens when you do it wrong. Once again, if you can see these dummy bullets, when you do it wrong, you're thinking, take the magazine out first and then do the slide. But when you do it wrong, what happens is you run the slide back, you let it go, it comes forward. If you never took the magazine out, guess what? You just loaded around in the chamber. And when I look, I don't know if you can see that. Sure enough, there's one in there. You might not be able to see it, but sure enough, there's a dummy round in the chamber right now because I did it wrong. So take the mag out, lock it back. If you can't lock it back for some reason, run the slide 3 times and watch. I should have been clued in that the first time I ran the slide, a shell came out. I really should have been clued in that the second time I ran the slide, another of those dummy rounds came out. If I'm watching what I'm doing, it's like, wait a minute. And that should clue me in that, hey, I left the magazine in the gun. Okay, that's how accidents happen. That's knowing how to safely unload the pistols, vital. Same thing for rifles. You always take the magazine out first if it has a removable magazine, like an AR. Then you work the action to get the shell out of the chamber. But people do it backwards all the time. That's how unloaded guns go off. They don't go off. They were left loaded. And the person was ignorant and caused a negligent discharge and possibly caused an injury or death. Okay, let's talk about learning how to shoot. In-person training is best. Find an instructor, ask their credentials, ask their experience. You'll find more NRA instructors than you will anything else because it's the largest training organization around. I will say NRA instructors are kind of the minimum competency level of instructors. Okay, there are more capable instructors than your standard run-of-the-mill NRA instructor, but there's fewer of them. So find out how long they've been shooting. You know, make sure they've been shooting for a while at least. I know some NRA instructors that get an instructor certification after they've only been shooting a handful of years, and that kind of scares me a little. Find out what their background is. Do they have law enforcement or military experience? That might be good, that might be bad. Depends what they're teaching you and how they're teaching you. If some people react well to the drill instructor type of instruction, other people, like my wife, do not react well to that at all. We've literally walked away from instructors when we were newer shooters because they were very, in-your-face drill instructor. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that instructor, even the most kind-hearted instructor, might not yell at you because they might need to. I generally try not to yell at my students, but there are times where you need to because if you're on the line with firearms, there's a hazard there. If someone makes a mistake that's dangerous, you have to make sure they hear you to correct the mistake instantly. So you have to raise your voice so they hear you over all the other noise, the shooting and the talking and the background noise, and they hear you over their hearing protection. So yes, an instructor yelling at a student is not uncommon, and it's not wrong. But instructors who default to yelling like a drill instructor as the default training mechanism is, in my opinion, not usually the best way to go, especially if you're a new shooter. Also, vet your instructor. I mean, talk to them, look at how they act. If they do something unsafe, leave. Here's an example. You'll see pictures of people teaching classes where they have a room full of students. I've seen this in several news stories. And they'll have a room full of students, and they'll have each student has their own gun that they brought, and they'll be handling what I hope to God are unloaded guns, but, unloaded gun becomes a loaded gun when you do it wrong. And they'll be handling them in the classroom where each person winds up pointing the gun at the back of the person in front of them. No, don't be in that class. Leave. Okay, if the instructor is using their carry gun as a demo gun in the class, oh, look, I'll pull the clip out and make sure it's safe. Don't. Leave. Okay? Unsafe. Don't do it. Where to find instructors, NRA website, local gun ranges, local gun clubs, internet search. Another thing, there's also an organization called Pink Pistols and Operation Blazing Swords. I misspoke. Operation Blazing Sword, not plural. That is a LGBTQ+ firearms friendly training organization. I've done some training through them. They're online, you can find them. Last thing I'm going to talk about, and this is a good thing to close it up on as we're running out of time, is responsibility. You have to understand the responsibility of just owning a firearm and having a firearm. It is something that can kill, flat out. Doesn't mean that you want to kill somebody. It just means it can, either accidentally or on purpose. If you choose to have a firearm for self-defense, understand that you have an instrument capable of causing lethal force. There is no shoot to wound. It's not that you're shooting to kill, because you don't necessarily want the person you're shooting to die, but you have to recognize it as a probable outcome. So you have to have the responsibility to use that power responsibly and correctly. You need to understand when it's proper to shoot at someone and when it is wrong. Okay? What it comes down to, stripped of all the legal jargon, is the only reason to shoot somebody is if it's the only way to save your own life or the life of someone else. Period, really. If your own life or the life of another innocent person is not at stake, don't shoot. Okay? Another thing about responsibility is before you pull that trigger, know exactly who you are shooting. There is more than one. I used to have a stack of these. I quit saving them because it happens too often. There's more than one instance of a family member shooting a family member who broke into their own house. Who would break into your own house? Who's a family member? Your kids. You ever sneak out when you were a kid? If you have kids, have your kids ever snuck out? Are you sure? Okay. More than one instance of family members shooting family members mistakenly when they come home unexpectedly or sneak back into the house after sneaking out or just surprise the person. So understand what you are doing before you pull that trigger. And as a little minor note, that's one of the reasons if you have a home defense firearm, I recommend you have a white light, flashlight attached to it, something bright, because that gives you one last chance to identify your target. Not that you should be using it as a flashlight, because anything you're shining the light on, you're also pointing the muzzle at. But if it's on that gun, before you pull the trigger, you can get one last chance to make sure who you're aiming at. Okay? Now, that's really all the time I have, and anything further we'd really have to do in person. Anyway, feel free to email me with questions. Feel free to post questions in the comments, and I will go through and look at them, maybe when this airs, maybe later. Thank you very much. We hope to see you at Penguicon next year.